Princess Josephina Eleonora of Eldrith sat by the frost-touched window of the royal study, staring out at the grey gardens below. Snow fell lightly on the marble statues and dormant rose bushes, muting the color of a world that had once been hers. At 23 she was not yet married, a delay considered scandalous in the courts of the kingdom. Her father, King Albrecht IV, had grown impatient. "You've had suitors," he reminded her weeks ago, pacing the throne room in his crimson robes, "but you read too much, speak too plainly, and eat without shame. You are not a duchess to be tolerated, you are a princess to be married." And so the letter was sent, a proposal by proxy to Prince Wilhelm of Velmora, heir to a smaller but strategically vital kingdom in the northern highlands. Eldrith and Velmora had long discussed an alliance. A royal marriage would seal it. Josephina knew what was at stake. She also knew she was not what they expected. She was no fragile ornament of silk and bone. Her figure was soft and full, her cheeks round, her smile open and untrained, raised with private tutors, not governesses. She loved astronomy more than embroidery, wrote poems in the margins of her books, and once asked the royal chef for lessons in baking. But she also knew how to walk with dignity. She spoke 5 languages. She could dance all the expected waltzes, even if her corsets protested, and she had read more treaties than most of her father's ministers. Still, when the answer came, it was a single, cold line from the Velmoran ambassador. Prince Wilhelm declines the arrangement, citing concerns regarding Her Highness's suitability. The room had spun. No official reason, no audience granted, just ... rejection. Behind the words, she could hear the true message whispered between courts: "She is too large, too bold, too much." King Albrecht was furious, not out of love, but out of humiliation. He issued a quiet decree. Josephina was to leave the capital for the winter. She would recover from her disappointment at her late uncle's villa in the Rothwald Valley, a remote estate with no court, no invitations, and no eyes. Only her most loyal maid, Greta, was permitted to accompany her. "You will not embarrass us further," the king had said. "You will disappear until the court forgets." Josephina had not spoken a word in reply, and now, days later, she sat in the quiet of exile, wrapped in wool and dignity, watching the snow settle on stone lions. "I suppose I am to reflect," she murmured to no one. Greta, ever practical, entered the room with a tray of tea. "Or to rest," she offered gently. "One need not reflect on the stupidity of men." Josephina smiled despite herself. "I wonder what he expected," she said. "A porcelain figurine with no voice, a silent shadow." Greta snorted. "He'd marry a shadow, and she suffocate him with silence." They shared a small laugh, the first since leaving the palace. But the ache remained, not from Prince Wilhelm's rejection, exactly, but from the message behind it, that she, in all her fullness, body, voice, soul, was unworthy of love. She stood and walked to the window again. In the distance, mist rolled down from the mountains of Rothwald, cloaking the pines in silver. Greta noticed. "You should walk tomorrow. There's a path along the ridge, just past the orchard." Josephina nodded absently. "Perhaps I will." What she didn't say was this: in that quiet snow-covered exile, something inside her had shifted. If the world had no place for her, she would build her own. And in the shadows of Rothwald, someone was watching the villa from afar, a man whose name still echoed in the old corridors of court, though he had not been seen in years. And so the pieces moved. A princess rejected by a prince, a duke who lived among ghosts, and a winter valley where forgotten hearts might awaken. The royal carriages of Eldrith had never crossed the northern border. So quietly, Josephina's gown rustled softly as the wheels bumped along the cobbled road to the palace of Velmora. The silence inside the coach was broken only by the occasional creak of wood and the sigh of wind outside. Greta sat across from her, face pale with nerves. "Are you sure you wish to do this?" Greta asked. Josephina looked out the window at the rising towers of the foreign court. "He may have declined the arrangement," she said evenly, "but the court of Velmora still extended an invitation to the winter solstice ball. To ignore it would confirm weakness." "You're not weak," Greta muttered. "No, but they think I am." The palace of Velmora glittered like something from a book of fairy tales. High arched ceilings, cascading crystal chandeliers, columns wrapped in winter ivy. Guests in silk and brocade filled the great ballroom, like a sea of mirrors and perfume. Josephina stood in the entrance for a breathless moment. She wore a deep garnet gown trimmed with gold, a color chosen not to flatter, but to command. Her dark curls were pinned in an elegant crown, and a pendant rested at her collar, the seal of Eldrith, polished but proud. The music paused as her presence was announced. Her Royal Highness, Princess Josephina Eleonora of Heads turned, fans stilled mid-flutter. Even the prince, standing near the orchestra, looked up. Josephina walked in with measured steps, her chin high, her spine straight. She saw Prince Wilhelm instantly. He was tall, blonde, young, every inch, the image of a storybook heir. And in that moment, the court waited for him to move. To greet her, to offer a gesture of civility. He did not. He turned away. It was not a dramatic gesture. He did not sneer or storm off. He simply offered his attention to a woman beside him, slender, smiling, wearing icy blue, and allowed the silence to speak for him. Whispers rose around the room. Like smoke, Josephina reached the center of the ballroom and stood alone beneath the chandeliers for a heartbeat. She felt 14 again, awkward, overheard, out of place, but then something settled in her chest. Not shame, resolve. She turned slowly, as if she had never expected welcome, and made her way to the edge of the room, where Greta stood in shock. "You don't need to prove anything, Your Highness," Greta whispered. "No," Josephina replied softly, "but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. Now I have." She stayed just long enough to be seen, to show that she would not shrink. Then she left, quietly, before the first waltz began. Behind her, the ballroom resumed, but not untouched. Whispers lingered in the air. "Did you see how calm she was? I thought she'd cry, but she didn't even blink. But gown was too bold, wasn't it? Or too brave?" That night, Josephina stood on the balcony of the guest wing, looking out across the snow-covered hills. The stars above Velmora glittered sharp and cold. "Let him marry glass," she murmured. "Let him love shadows." She unclasped the pendant of Eldrith from her neck and placed it on the marble ledge. For now, she did not need it. She would not be defined by anyone else's. Silence, not anymore. The snow deepened as the carriage climbed the hills of northern Eldrith, away from the palace, away from the court, and away from everything Josephina had been raised to believe she must become. It was not exile in name, but in spirit. King Albrecht, ever calculating, had agreed to Josephina's retreat to the Rothwald Valley with barely a nod. "Take your winter among the trees," he had said, "and return only when you remember your place." But Josephina didn't plan to return the same woman. Rothwald had belonged to her late uncle, Duke Theodor, her mother's younger brother, a quiet man of science and solitude. After his death, the estate had been left mostly abandoned, too far from court to be of value. That made it perfect. The journey took 2 days, with only Greta for company. The landscape changed with each hour, from bustling villages to winding roads lined with pines, and finally to the rolling silence of snow-covered meadows. On the third morning, the carriage turned off the main road and approached a stone gate nearly hidden by ivy and frost. Behind it rose a modest manor house, ivy-clad and still, nestled against the base of the mountains. Rothwald House. It was not grand, but it was hers inside. The air was cold, the furniture covered in white cloths. Greta moved quickly to light fires in the hearths while Josephina walked slowly through each room, fingers brushing over forgotten shelves and dusty window panes. No servants, no advisors, no dresses to be fitted, no corridors to whisper her weight, only space and silence and breath. By the end of the week, Josephina had found a rhythm. She rose early, walked the snowy garden paths in heavy boots, read by the parlor fire, and took meals in the sunroom overlooking the frost-covered orchard. Greta insisted on maintaining some protocol titles, proper posture at meals, but Josephina began to shed them like old skin. "Your Highness, the tea is ready," Greta said one afternoon. Josephina smiled gently. "Just Josephina. Here, please." Greta hesitated. Then, "Very well, Josephina." It felt strange and free. It was during one of her morning walks that she saw him, a tall man on horseback, dressed in dark wool, watching the house from the ridge beyond the orchard. His posture was straight, soldierly, but his face was shadowed beneath his hood. He made no move to approach. By the time she returned to the manor, he was gone. "Did you see someone on the ridge?" she asked Greta that evening. Greta frowned. "A man?" "What kind of man?" "On a horse. He didn't seem threatening, just still." Greta looked out the window toward the hills. This land used to belong to another duke, didn't it? Before your uncle? Yes, Josephina said slowly. But I don't recall his name. Greta nodded thoughtfully. The villagers still whisper about the Rothwald line, especially the last one who held title before the war. Josephina turned to her. What do they say? Greta's voice dropped. That he lives alone now, a widower. Lost his wife in the Great Fire. Never remarried. Never returned to court. Some call him a ghost. Josephina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The next morning, she walked the orchard path again, and once more, from the ridge above the trees, he was watching. Not a ghost, not a threat. A man with eyes like iron beneath the snow. The third time she saw him, Josephina chose not to return to the manor. She stopped at the edge of the orchard, snow crunching softly beneath her boots, and looked directly toward the ridge where he sat astride his horse. The figure was still, as always, cloaked in charcoal wool, posture upright, hands resting on the reins with calm command. She raised her gloved hand in greeting. A quiet beat passed, then he nodded, a subtle dip of the chin, and turned. His horse slowly disappearing into the woods. It was not much, but it was something. Later that week, she decided to walk farther. Beyond the orchard path, the land dipped into a narrow valley scattered with bare trees and remnants of old stone walls. Greta objected, of course, but Josephina insisted. I've lived in a palace my entire life, she said. Let me breathe where no one is watching. But someone was as she climbed a slope to catch her breath. A voice, low, precise, echoed from the trees. You walk alone in these woods often. Josephina turned, startled. He was standing 10 paces away, horse at his side, cloak open, to reveal a dark waistcoat and weather-worn boots. His eyes were steel gray, sharp and unreadable. I walk where I please, she replied evenly, heart-pounding. And if I'm trespassing, I'll happily turn back. The man's mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. You're not trespassing. Rothwald land ends at the ridge. You're just beyond it. She nodded slowly. Then it seems I've crossed a line. He stepped closer, never breaking eye contact. Most people don't dare. Josephina straightened her shoulders. I'm not most people. He studied her for a moment, then gave a short bow. Alaric von Rothwald, former Duke of these hills, though I've long ceased using the title. She blinked. Then the whispers were true. Only the quiet ones. A silence passed, filled only by wind rustling through skeletal branches. Josephina extended her hand. His gaze did not waver. Even from a distance, a woman walking alone in red velvet in the snow tends to be noticed. She flushed despite the cold. I didn't expect company, she said. Nor I. Another pause. Not awkward, deliberate. Waited. Then he nodded toward the ridge. There's a clearing ahead. My horse drinks from the stream there. You're welcome to join us. Josephina hesitated. This was not courtship, not performance. It was invitation. I would like that, she said. The clearing was small and untouched. A stream cut through the snow like dark glass. Alaric tied his horse to a low branch and knelt to gather snow in his hands, rubbing it along the animal's flanks. He moved with quiet purpose, not a man lost, but one who had retreated by choice. I remember your family, he said without looking up. Your mother was kind. Your uncle, Theodore, he used to bring me books during the war. He was the only one who understood I didn't belong in gowns and banquets. Josephina murmured. Alaric met her eyes. Then perhaps you and I are not so different. She looked away. Do you always watch from afar? Only when the view is worth watching. Silence again, this one warmer. Josephina knelt by the stream, dipped her fingers into the icy water, and whispered, Then perhaps you should walk closer next time. When she rose to leave, he did not follow, but he watched her until the trees swallowed her figure once more. That evening, as she warmed her hands by the fire, Greta studied her carefully. You met someone, she said. Josephina didn't deny it. I met a man who lives in silence, and sees more than most who speak. Greta raised a brow. And do you intend to see him again? Josephina smiled softly. I think he intends to be seen. Snow melted slowly in the Rothwald Valley as late winter gave way to the earliest hints of spring. The frozen orchards softened, revealing patches of earth and the pale green tips of brave little shoots. Rothwald House, once cold and still, began to feel alive again, and so did Josephina. She and Alaric began to walk together every few days, always casually, never arranged. He would appear near the orchard, or at the forest path, and without a word, they would fall into step. Sometimes they spoke, other times they didn't need to. The silence between them was not empty, it was safe. On the 6th afternoon they met. Alaric brought her a book, leather-bound, slightly worn. "I believe your uncle intended this for you," he said, handing it to her without ceremony. "He left it in my library after the war." Josefina opened it gently. Essays on the Natural Order, annotated in Theodore's small, looping handwriting. She smiled. He would read passages aloud while making soup. Said the only things that didn't lie were stars and seasons. Alaric tilted his head. He was right. They sat on a fallen log beneath a half-blooming tree. Book opened between them, and read aloud until the sun dropped low behind the ridge. Over the next 2 weeks, Josefina began bringing her own offerings, letters she had written and never sent, filled with questions no one in court ever cared to answer. Do you think the crown means anything without kindness? Have you ever stopped trying to be beautiful for someone else, just to breathe? Why is silence only considered power when men choose it? Alaric listened. He never laughed, never interrupted. Sometimes, he replied with a story of his own, a memory from the battlefield, a quote from an old tactician, a broken promise from long ago. He never spoke of his wife, and she never asked. But when Josefina once mentioned how quiet the house must feel after supper, he answered softly, "Some nights I still set 2 plates." The lavender began to grow near the western wall of the Rothwald estate. It had seeded wildly since the gardens had been abandoned, but Josefina loved it. She asked Greta to leave it untouched. "I like how it insists on growing," she said, as if no one told it winter was coming. Alaric noticed the next time they met. He brought her a bundle of the purple blooms, wrapped clumsily in linen. "They smell like you," he said plainly. Josefina flushed. "I didn't realize I had a scent." "You do," he replied, peaceful and stubborn. One day, as they watched the mist roll across the valley, she asked, "Do you miss it? The court, the titles?" He shook his head. "I miss simpler things, a fire that stays lit, a room with laughter, a reason to dress in the morning." She looked at him, quiet for a long moment. "You don't see me as broken?" she asked. He frowned. "You're not broken, Josefina. They said I was too much, too loud, too heavy. They were small, not you." She blinked hard, looking down at the book in her lap. "I don't know what to do with someone who sees me clearly." "Then don't do anything," he said, softly. "Just stay." As she left that day, he touched her hand for the first time, not to guide her, not to claim her, but simply to let her know he was still there. And Josefina, for the first time in her life, didn't feel like she had to apologize for being exactly who she was. The first warning came from Greta. She entered the drawing room one morning, cheeks flushed with both cold and concern. "There's a carriage coming up the road, Royal Crest, from Velmora." Josefina's book slipped from her fingers. She stood slowly. "Did you see who it was?" Greta hesitated, not clearly, but the color, silver and blue. "It's him, isn't it?" Josefina didn't answer. She didn't need to. Only one man had ever worn the blue of Velmora and broken her name in half with silence. Prince. Wilhelm stepped down from the carriage as if the snow had been ordered to part for him. He looked exactly as she remembered, elegant, polished, self-assured, except now, there was something less confident in his eyes, something calculating. "Your Highness," he said, bowing low. "Or should I say, Lady Josefina," stood on the stone steps, arms crossed. "You've never called me anything before. Why begin now?" He smiled tightly. "I come with goodwill. You came with silence before." Wilhelm sighed. "Perhaps I was hasty, misled by advisors. The arrangement was more complex than I understood at the time." "And now?" she asked, voice calm. "Now the political landscape has shifted. Velmora stands to gain from unity, with Eldrith more than ever. I believe your father would be receptive to reopening talks." Josefina blinked. "You mean to say that because you now need what I always offered, you've decided I'm acceptable?" "I came to see you in person," he said. "To speak plainly, you are admired. The people find your strength refreshing. The court may have misjudged." She gave a dry laugh. "I wasn't asking to be judged. I was asking to be seen." He stepped closer. "Let's leave the past behind. I propose we begin again." From the forest's edge, a pair of grey eyes watched the silver carriage gleam in the sun. Alaric had come to walk the ridge, as he often did, but the sight of foreign colors at Rothwald Manor stopped him cold. He did not descend. He did not interrupt. But when he returned home that evening, he did not light the fire. Josefina spent the rest of the day in silence. She did not answer Wilhelm's second note, delivered by footman, requesting a private dinner. Instead, she wandered the garden paths, now soft with thawing soil and early crocus blooms. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply felt tired of being chosen when it was convenient, of being seen only when someone needed something. It wasn't until 3 days later that she saw Alaric again. He was waiting at the edge of the stream, where they always met. His posture was stiffer than usual, his coat still dusted with snow. "You've had a guest," he said. She nodded. "Yes, your suitor returns. Curious timing." "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It never was." He looked at her, long and unreadable. "Do you wish to go back to him?" She shook her head. "He doesn't know who I am. He only knows what I represent." Alaric looked away. "And do you know what I am?" he asked. "You're the only person who's never asked me to be less." The wind moved between them, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the distant field. Then Alaric said, "If you choose him, I'll understand." Josefina stepped forward. "But I've already made my choice," she said, and this time, it was her hand that found his. The invitation arrived, sealed with gold wax, a royal summons. King Albrecht had commanded Josefina to return for the spring gala, a diplomatic event where nobles from Eldrith, Velmora, and other allied realms would attend. The court needed to display unity. Appearances mattered, so did pawns. Josefina held the letter between her fingers for a long time before speaking. "They want me as a symbol again," she said to Greta. "Not as a daughter, not as a person." Greta looked at her firmly. "Then, show them what a symbol can do." 3 weeks later, Rothwald House stood quiet behind her as Josefina rode south with Greta at her side and Alaric not far behind. He hadn't planned to come, but when she asked, not begged, asked, he'd simply said, "I will not let you walk into their fire alone." The ballroom in Eldrith was larger than she remembered. Gold banners hung from the columns. Candles flickered against mirrors and silk gowns swirled like petals across the polished floor. Josefina wore lavender, not a court-approved blue or white, but the color of the flower that had grown beside her pain. Her gown had no corset, no jewels, no apology. Her hair was half down, curls loose around her face. She looked radiant. She looked like herself. Whispers began the moment she entered. She came back. "Did you see her dress? I heard the prince is here. Is she trying again?" Joseph ignored them all. Prince Wilhelm approached her during the second waltz. "May I have this dance?" he asked, voice low. She looked at him, then smiled, not cruelly, but with clarity. "No, thank you," she said. "I've already danced with the past." She turned away before he could answer, and the court gasped when a man in a black coat, with silver embroidery, stepped forward from the shadows. Alaric von Rothwald, silent, tall, unsmiling. He extended his hand. Without hesitation, Josefina took it. The music resumed, and they danced. Not a perfect waltz. They moved with care, not flair, but they were together, and that alone was scandal enough. People stared. Some whispered, but others watched in silence because there was something undeniable about the way he looked at her, the way she held his gaze, the way her head tilted back in laughter without fear. Josefina wasn't there to be accepted. She was there to exist, fully, freely, lovingly. By the end of the evening, no royal decree had been made, but something had shifted, and when she and Alaric stepped out onto the balcony beneath the moonlight, he leaned close and said softly, "You were braver than any soldier I've ever known." She looked up at him, heart steady. "And you are the only man I've ever known who never tried to save me. Just stand beside me." That night, she didn't fall asleep to the sound of whispers behind closed doors. She fell asleep to silence, and someone breathing beside her who truly saw her. Spring came slowly to Rothwald Valley. The last of the snow had melted, leaving behind soft soil, brave flowers, and new life along the orchard paths. Birds returned to the pines, and the lavender field, once a patch of stubborn growth, had begun to bloom with purpose. Josefina walked there often, alone at times, but more often with Alaric. Their silences had grown warmer, their touches more frequent. Not rushed, not dramatic, earned. One morning, just before dawn, Alaric appeared at her door. He wore no cloak, no armor of titles, only a linen shirt and worn boots, hair still damp from sleep. "Come," he said simply. She followed. They walked without speaking, hands brushing occasionally, until they reached the ridge above the valley, the very place where he used to watch her from afar. Now, they stood side by side, watching the first light break over the mountains. The mist lifted the fields, stretched wide below, and Josefina felt something rise in her chest, not fear, not longing. Peace. Alaric turned to her. "I never believed I would live beyond duty," he said softly. "But you made me remember who I was before the war, before the loss, before silence became safer than hope." He reached into his coat and took out a small box, carved from dark wood. "I don't offer you a crown or a kingdom. I offer you this land, this life, and the love of a man who would rather walk behind you than stand in front of anyone else." He opened the box. Inside, a ring of iron and silver, shaped like twined branches. No diamond, no crest, just beauty, simple and strong. "Will you marry me, Josefina Elia?" She didn't cry. She didn't pause. She only smiled wide and full and unafraid, and said, "I will, and not because I must, but because with you, I finally can." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as the sun rose higher, casting gold across the lavender below. Josefina leaned into Alaric's shoulder and whispered, "I spent my whole life trying to be chosen. You're the first person who simply saw me." He pressed his lips to her hair. "You were never invisible, Josefina," he said. "The world just wasn't ready." They stood together as the day began. Two souls once pushed into silence, now rooted like the valley. They had both come to call home. Years passed. The court forgot the scandal. The alliance with Velmora shifted, as alliances always did, and Josefina's name gradually stopped appearing in royal records. But in the hills of Rothwald, she was never forgotten. They called her the Duchess of Lavender, not for title, but for how she brought color and life where others saw only ruin. She opened a small school on the estate, hosted dinners beneath the stars, planted gardens where walls once stood. Children whispered stories of how a princess once danced with a soldier under moonlight, and how that single waltz had silenced an entire court. She never wore a crown again. She didn't need one. She had chosen her life, and it had chosen her back. In her journals, discovered years later, Josefina had written, "Let them say I was too much. Let them say I laughed too loudly, loved too freely, walked too boldly. I would rather be remembered for living than for shrinking to be loved." If you've ever been told you had to change to be accepted, if you've ever been made to feel too much, let Josefina's story remind you, you don't have to be less to deserve more. And one day, someone will love you, not despite who you are, but because of it. If this story moved your heart, subscribe for more unforgettable tales of courage, love, and the quiet rebellion of simply being yourself. Your next favorite story might be just one chapter away. Thank you for watching.